Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to episode 95 of Trail Society, produced by Free Trail, brought to you by Rabbit. I'm Corrine Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
And holy Toledo, I don't know where you all live, but man, it was spring hard in the PNW the last couple of days. Like sunny, warm, a fool's spring, a false spring, whatever you want to call it. It's been really, really nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
same here in Boulder. I feel
Like
like
sports
everyone
bra
is
weather.
out and like shorts and a t-shirt and like going around. I'm like, all right, you guys, you're all these transplants coming to Colorado enjoying it, but you don't know. We get all of the snow, the heaviest snowfall in like March, April. So I'm just gearing up. Got my
Yeah.
gloves and pants ready to go.
Yeah, Keely, I saw you out tromping around in some pretty florals and some fun colors, and it seemed like you were really soaking up the sunshine as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I got out of my exam Friday and it was like beautiful out. So I was like, all right, we're just gonna go romp around. I ran into some people and they were like, oh, like nice to see you. What are you running? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just running around. And they're like, do you want to run with us for a little? I'm like, sure.
That's so
Just
awesome.
like, yeah, it was really, really nice. Yeah, I love the spring, but I feel like it hopefully is not too much of a false one, but I've never had a birthday in Portland that hasn't been raining, so I am pessimistic that it's gonna hold because my birthday's end of April and I've had to cancel like three outdoor birthday parties. So,
Yeah. Oh yeah, you and Steven are like the same week, I think, like days
nice.
apart. He's the 28th.
End of April's the best time to be born.
Yeah. Well, I'm April 2nd, so we get the whole birthday and we celebrate
Birthday month.
birthday months in our
Yep.
household. And so April 2nd to April 28th is our birthday celebration in our household. So I dig it. But I guess, perfect timing to talk about it being warm and spring-like out because Rabbit, our title, our presenting sponsor, our partner in everything we do for the year, because that's really what it is. It's a partnership. They're launching their the new trail line just launched this past week, and we've got some really pretty clothing coming our way. Things like the new UPF Deflector Sun hoodie, which got a UPF rating of 50, which I would have loved to have on my body when we did some spring corn skiing on Saturday. But it's got me excited. Like this new fun clothing coming in the pipeline. We're actually all wearing a piece of rabbit clothing right now. I know we talked about how it's been nice and springy, but today's a little bit more overcast, a little bit cold. Plus, we're chilling on a Sunday evening recording this, and you both look so freaking cozy and matchy matchy.
I know.
Matching your friends is like the best thing ever. So,
It's good. I like it. I know. And Keely and I got the same like bright pink sweatshirt, which I just have like I just love the color. I just have literally have it sitting on the chair in my
I
room.
know. I
My
feel
little
very
beauty.
I feel very, very Seattle. Like mine, I'm wearing that same sweatshirt right now, but it is gray. And it's like it's very cozy and comfy. I love the cut of it. So we are just like it's like Christmas. Stephen was maybe a little bit like, oh no, another box. And I was like, oh yes, another box. And this is what I'm gonna live in now since I work from home. It's pretty great.
yeah, I'm loving it. Yeah, the downtime jacket's what I've been wearing, and I've wore it to anatomy lab and wore it over my scrubs until I got into the actual cadaver part. Then I put it on going to another thing, put on jeans, put on a nicer shirt, and I was like, dress it up. So, just wearing it all day.
You're like, it's my pajamas and I'm wearing it out. This is great. That is really, really funny. They have a matching set of like jogger bottoms as well that are also super, super cozy. So you could go like full Canadian tuxedo in this like rabbit downtime jacket and pants setup. Yeah. I love it. So we're excited to get more product going with them. We've got some like maybe very sneaky, very fast things coming down the pipeline that we'll be able to share with you guys, hopefully in like the next month or two. And while we have you here, you can go get 10% off any of the Rabbit merchandise, including that new spring trail running kit that just launched. And you're going to use our code Trail March at checkout for 10% off. It is good through the end of March and we'll be frequently updating that code. But Trail March will get you 10% off any Rabbit merchandise. So go check it out. Let us know what you get. Tell us how cozy you are. Send us photos. DMs a bust.
Yeah, tell us what you wear so we can all twin.
Yes, please. Can we show up somewhere matching? That's gonna be amazing. Okay, okay. I digress. We're thrilled. We're excited. And we've got some fun stuff coming down the pipeline that we will be keeping you appraised of. We've got some fun stuff coming in this episode. We're going to do a quick results hit, a little tiny bit of fun news before we dive into an amazing episode with a dynamic research duo actually from Stanford that we get to share with you today, and then some society slam. So to kick things off, results. We're kind of recording in the in-between weeks. This will come out March 11th. So the most like top of mind things for me was Gran Canaria just happened. It was the next stop on the World Trail Majors, and it was pretty exciting. Caleb Olson, Park City's finest, took down the win and actually ran faster than Pow's ever run on the course as well, which is pretty exciting. The course has changed a little bit year to year, so apples to oranges, I don't know, but really cool to see him run really, really fast. And then Henrietta Albin, sorry, John Albin's other half, super strong runner, also took the win there, and her time is the second fastest time ever, only slower than Courtney Dauwalter's 2023 crossing of the island. So while it might feel like she kind of was out there in no man's land by herself for a chunk of the race, she ran incredibly fast. So huge shout outs to both Caleb Olson and Henrietta Albin in taking the wins over there. And if you haven't, I really enjoyed Caleb Olson sat down with Finn over on the Single Track podcast, and it's a super interesting interview. So if you haven't checked that out, go give our buddy, our Park City homeboy, Caleb Olson a listen. And then the World Trail Majors this year introduced a short course series. I don't know if you guys saw that. It's like the 50K at Black Canyon was part of it. There's a 50-ish K at Hong Kong 100K weekend that was part of it this year. So the marathon distance, about 47 kilometers. So a long marathon, but a short 50K at Gran Canaria was also part of that series. And Francesco Pupi took the win on the men's side. I don't know if you guys saw any of the footage that came out of it, but it was a drag race. Like it was pretty nuts actually. Like he overtook Robert Bacemo and like in the last like maybe 800 meters and only won by 18 seconds. And Robert won this race, I believe, here last year. So just like a fierce battle. It was super cool. I
I
had
did see
FOMO.
like the video from that. It looks insane. It was, and like, yeah, when he passed him, like he like when friend, yeah, but he just didn't have anything in return. He looked so just tired and hot at the end of that race.
It's a hot island to race on. It can also be super cold overnight for the classic, so it throws rocks at you. It's a whole thing. And then on the women's side, though, Jen Lichter defended her win, doubling back after winning in 2024, and she bested the field by 8 minutes. And like I think Sylvia Nordskar was second, and she's a phenom on the Golden Trail World Series. So just really cool to see Jen Lichter after doubling back from the VK. I think she was third in the VK earlier in the week too. So just pulling off some really great results early in the season. Also top of mind is Way Too Cool 50K just took place as well. Um, in Cool, California. Way Too Cool and Chuckanut, I feel like have been kind of like the staple early season 50Ks. We're now having other races like Big Alta and Gorge and some other like local or like some West Coast in particular US races come into that conversation. I think Black Canyon 50K is also going to be in that conversation moving forward, but really fast times on the front end. Hans Troyer ran away with it, but was still shy. I think by like Max King's record is like 310, I want to say, and Hans Troyer ran solo to 319. So Max King just freaking really good, it turns out.
Where's the
But then
versatility?
yes, yeah, like 3K steeplechase to like trying to throw down at Leadville in Western States, like very, very versatile athlete. An athlete that I do not know, Finian Jacobson Schultz took second, and then Tommy Sullivan of the MK Tommy Sullivan duo took third. On the women's side, it was actually a really tight battle for the win. Jennifer Schmidt and Emily Clark were 1 and 2, and they were both well under that 4 hour mark, kind of like 350s low. Still off the course record, but really fast on that course. Going sub 4 on Way Too Cool is a quick time, and
Mhm.
it's really cool to see that. And then Kareth Arnold held on for third place in like 406 or 405. But just a really epic battle for 1 and 2. And I think it was Emily Clark's maybe her first ever 50K. I think MK coaches Emily, and then Jen or first Schmidt, I think, is coached by Rick Floyd. So kind of like a fun coaching circle because Rick coaches MK. And I think Yes, I think Rick coaches MK and Jennifer Schmidt, and then MK coaches Emily Clark. So it's like this like fun little circle of humans that are friends and coach each other. So, yep, Jennifer Schmidt, Emily Clark, two names to keep an eye out on, running very legit times on the course. Kareth Arnold getting ready for Canyons High, I believe, running the 50K here. And then I wanted to give a special shout out to Orcas Island 100-mile race. Not a big race. I think there were only like 55 finishers this year. The weather is generally awful for it, and it had plenty of rain this year as well. But the
Horrible.
cool thing there was that the women's field went second, third, fourth, and fifth overall, and they all finished within basically an hour, like from second to fifth. So there was like fairly tight racing. It sounds like late into the race as well. So I just wanted to give a special shout out to Katie Lacko, Yitka Wynn, Joanna Pisarski, and Christine Mosley, who, again, there was one guy out front, and then it was literally lady, 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 just like throwing down. And according to Yitka, they were like really close to each other for much of the race. So
Wow.
super cool to see that. Yeah, just a bunch of tough ladies on Orcas Island getting it done.
Yeah, that race, it shocks me every year that people still go and do it, just knowing how horrible it is.
Yeah, they moved the 50K actually. The 50K used to be kind of this same time frame too, like kind of end of January, early February, and they've moved it to like June, I think
Mm,
now, because it's like been canceled numerous years. It's just like the weather can be really nasty. It rained when we were out there last year for it. So, um extra huge kudos to people getting the 100K, the 100-mile rather done on Orcas Island. But yeah, we're missing some races. We got some races that will come out again before this episode comes out, and some that have also happened. But I think we're all looking towards Chuckanut, Big Alta, Gorge, Chianti, Valhalla. Kind of, there's like an onslaught of racing happening this month and into early April. So
are you going to
just
be at
keep an
Big
eye on
Alta?
things. I don't think so. I actually need to talk to Dylan about that. Dylan, if you're listening to this, let's chat. I've got to figure out what my responsibilities are. So I think I'll be at Gorge. I don't think I'll be at Big Alta, but working to
Nice.
source it a little bit. So I was there last year. It was amazing. We're not doing a live broadcast this year. So that's
Got it.
kind of what it boils down to. Anyone racing Big Alta?
I'm going.
I know. I was hoping you'd say that.
Spring break.
I
Woo.
love that.
That's
That's gonna
how
be
I pick
super
my
fun.
races now. Yeah.
That'll be
I'm excited.
amazing.
It's like what's drivable where we can take the dogs, where we have a good friend that has a house that has a race. That sounds fun.
Nice. That's gonna be,
Checks all the boxes.
are you
We're
staying with
staying with
Jeff
Jeff.
Stern?
Yeah. Hmm.
And all the doggos.
Hmm.
Oh
Love
boy.
it. I love it. Yeah. So Big Alta was an inaugural event last year. It basically runs from Dylan Bowman's house, more or less. It's like literally a park down the street. We ran the broadcast out of his garage last year. It was pretty sick. It's a beautiful course. The 50K does have like a sneaky, hard finishing section that we called the Whopper last year. It's a pretty steep descent into a steep ascent after you've like trashed yourself on like some like very runnable grindy climbs. So hopefully it's not like the first super hot weekend of the season, nor hopefully is it like super rainy atmospheric river. I hope you have perfect California conditions because
Thank
it's
you.
gorgeous. That zone, like Lucas Valley, kind of outside of the
Hmm.
like traditional Marin Headlands area, is so pretty, and like I'm shocked that there isn't another race out there.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I haven't ran the majority of those trails, only a couple of them, so I'm excited to just explore new trails and like, yeah, I hope it's that perfect California temp that has all the locals wearing the puffies that we all think is like perfect. It's like 50.
Yeah, I think this is great. It's like I lived in a puffy jacket and shorts and sandals like the entire time we lived in San Francisco. And so I'm hoping that that is the weather that calls you there. Um I love it. Okay, so keep your eyes out. Racing is happening like fast and furious. Next golden ticket race is Chianti. Gorge is a US qualifier for the long team in the 100K. That race is going to be nasty, stacked. There's not a live broadcast there, but there is one for Lake Sonoma, which is the same weekend, which is the same weekend as Desert Rats. So there's like racing is happening. So don't blink. You're gonna miss it. I only pulled one little bit of fun news and I'm gonna read it if that's okay. Um, but the Masters, like US National Indoor Track and Field Championships happened recently. And um a highlight that I thought was really cool was 62-year-old Olympian comes, quote, out of retirement to break the Masters 200-meter record. So essentially four-time Olympian, Um, Joda Clark-Diggs made a remarkable comeback at the USA Track and Field Masters Indoor Championships, breaking the American record in the 200 meter for the 60 to 64 age category in a time of 28 seconds, 28.62 seconds. That's not slow. Like,
Mm-mm.
I don't know if I could right now run a 28.62 200. The 62-year-old's performance was her first competitive race in 25 years since she competed in the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Her feat of setting the American record and winning this race was witnessed by her daughter, Talitha Diggs, the professional Adidas sprinter and world champion. Talitha, I think is probably how you say her name. Clark Diggs, who formerly specialized in the 800 meter and once served as the captain of the U.S. Olympic track and field team, claimed the national title by only 0.16 seconds over competitors who also broke the previous record. I love that the 60 to 64-year-old age group at the Masters USA Track and Field Championships was like that stacked. That just like makes me really, really happy. So we've got time, is all I'm saying. We've got time to get our sprinting on, to go throw down. And I think it's really cool. And I love that her daughter, who's also now a talented athlete and a world champion, was there to witness and support her mom get it done. Um, okay, I guess I should intro our amazing interviewees for this episode. We got to sit down with just a research dynamic duo from Stanford, including Dr. Morgan Smith, who's a third-year postdoc in the genetics department, with a passion for women's athletic performances, and does that work through the WuSci Human Performance Alliance at Stanford, which is an incredible group of individuals. Joining Morgan is the fourth-year genetics PhD candidate and frequent collaborator of hers, Naiomi Hunter. Naomi's passion is combining women's health with computational biology. Hello, a fellow super nerd, and has become a bit of a wearables expert in the process. And today they are a powerhouse team, working together on a lot of projects collaboratively. And that's something that we want so much more of in this space. So I'm going to step out of the way so we can listen to this really, really fun interview.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan. I'm a third-year postdoc at Stanford. My PhD in physiology and kinesiology. So I've been in the movement space, both academically and professionally, for almost 10 years now. And I'm super excited to be here.
Hi, so I'm Naomi. I'm a fourth year PhD student candidate, I guess. I'm in the genetics department, and my background is in genomics, so computational biologist by training. And my background is actually in like evolutionary biology, and I used to work in spider silk genetics. And so the transition from spiders to humans is relatively new, the last 3 years. It's been awesome, and that is, yeah.
I love it. And we generally, in recent interviews, this I think has been a theme since we all got going with this podcast. When we have researchers on or we have people who are into their career paths, I like to do this thing like, how the heck did I get here? Because it's a winding path. Like no
Mm.
third grader, Naomi wakes up and is like, I want to be a computational biologist, at least not many third graders. And at the same time, like you've made a big jump from spiders to humans. So can you walk us through kind of the winding path that has now led you to be a PhD candidate at Stanford?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually love that that was the example you gave because I decided in seventh grade that I wanted to be a geneticist. We learned about Punnett squares in like some, middle school biology class. And I'm half black, half white, and I grew up in this like really small farm town, all white people, and I always like race was just always such a prevalent part of the conversation of my childhood. And so I was always wondering, like, why do I look so different from everybody? Why do I have these traits and not these traits? Like, why don't I have these traits from my mom? Why is my hair a combination curl pattern, but I have like her eyes and not my dad's? Like all these things. And genetics gave me clarity in a lot of ways. Um, Little silly Punnett squares that aren't even, super accurate. They're not a good way to predict genetic inheritance, really, but they are great for foundational education. And um, love with genetics, and it was something that I was pretty good at. And I was lucky to have a couple people in high school kind of guide me in the sense that making it apparent that there is this option called PhD. You basically stay in school forever, and this is the best way, quote unquote, best way to become a scientist, highest earning potential, safety, all that jazz. And so I was like, all right, locked in. So I went to my undergraduate at the University of New Hampshire, and I studied genetics. There weren't a lot of colleges in 2015 that offered genetics as a major, so that really narrowed down. It was like Texas A&M or University of New Hampshire, and so I went to the University of New Hampshire, studied genetics, and I was really in love with evolution, just so fascinating. And computational biology was becoming more and more integrated, and the enthusiasm around the field was like really growing in my sphere around 2016. And so I kind of like dove in there. And then I went on to work at the American Museum of Natural History, and that's where I did
Cool.
spider silk stuff. Yes, I literally felt like Peter Parker, like gonna get bit by a radioactive spider. Um, at the museum. And so I worked there, studied spider silk. It was amazing. But I still knew that was a post-bac program, and I still knew I wanted to get my PhD. And so I only applied to three schools, and I was like, this will be up to the universe. If I get in to Stanford, Harvard, or BU,
Wow.
then I'll get a PhD. And if I don't, then I won't. Yeah, and that's kind of like what brought me out here to California, and now I'm a PhD at Stanford. Like we got in, Harvard said no. They're lost. But so yeah, that's what brought me here. And it was the School of Medicine, and I did not know what the heck I was going to do, but it was really kismet timing in that I was like really getting into wearable tech myself just from a personal space. And the conversation around personalized medicine was also entering my world because of the lab that Morgan and I are in. The PI of the lab was the chair of my department, genetics department. And so everybody knows about his work. You know, he walks around with 8 wearables on at all times and is like the wearable guy. Um, and my friend had gotten diagnosed with PCOS, and so I was doing a deep dive and just really appalled at the lack of information out there. And I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. And so I was really surprised by that. And it was also great timing in that the zeitgeist was finally talking about Black, experiences in the medical space, and racism in healthcare was really a big part of the societal conversation around 2020. And I started grad school in 2021. And so all of these things were just kind of fresh on my mind, and married them together and joined the lab and started a study. And Morgan came the next year. Like it was just really like the universe lined things up for us. So that is kind of what got me here from seventh grade, Naomi.
I was gonna say I use the term like flailing forward all the time, but that feels like not flailing. Like it just seems like the universe was like very much directing a path that makes complete sense now, which
Yeah,
is
my
so
ancestors
cool.
had like really clear goals for me. So
Yeah, and the wearable tech space is super interesting. Side tangent, just like about like particularly when it comes to like health outcomes for Black
Mhm.
individuals in the medical system. Like we know that like pulse oximeters like don't work as well, et cetera. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. It's a like clear result of Black people being excluded from the R&D of these sensors, and the lack of thought around melanin absorptivity, because,
Hmm.
white people are largely designing these instruments, and it's just not something that gets thought about. So really speaks
Yeah.
to the importance of the inclusion and the need for diversity in these jobs.
Yeah. I was gonna say I'm translucent. Getting to like my bloodstream is very easy. But that's not the case for everyone. So it's super, super important. Building off of that, Morgan, so now you've been a postdoc for a number of years. You're working in this really cool space. How'd you get there? Like what is your background? Similar path line as far as like, what you wanted to be when you grew up to like now being a postdoc and talking to us here.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I was in grade school, I wanted to be a like professional women's basketball player. And you guys can't tell, but I'm 5'2", and I've been 5'2" since like the third grade. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be so tall and I'm gonna be able to play. It's gonna be awesome. And then everyone kept growing and I stopped growing. So I had to retire those dreams. I mean, there's still some like short queens out there, but I was not good enough to be there. But I wanted to play at Tennessee and like do all of these things and kind of be in sport. And as I was going through like my high school career, I was playing a bunch of sports and I was always super active. So I played basketball and I ran track. And so I was like, I just want to be around sports forever. This is awesome. This is what I want to do. And so even though I didn't play anything collegiately on the varsity level, when I got to the University of Florida, I played club field hockey because I just wasn't willing to let go of like organized sport. And I started on a kinesiology track. And so it was pretty unique in that way of like similar to Naomi, there are more and more kinesiology programs now. But for students to start in that department as their first year versus transferring into it at the time was pretty new. And so I feel very like lucky that I was able to start there and like I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. Like movement science is awesome. And while I was in college, I worked at the rec. Like I was kind of like your gym girl. Like I was at the gym all the time. I played sports. I worked at the rec. I was studying like movement. And so then I became a personal trainer and I was like, okay, this is kind of where I think my path was going to go. And actually, kind of before that, I thought I was going to be a physical therapist because I was hurt all the time. And so I was always in PT for years and years. And I was like, this is so fun. I love doing this. Like, I love coming here and like, I want to be able to treat athletes and do this. And as I was like meeting more PTs and I was like, okay, actually, this isn't really my jam. Like, I love you guys, but I don't want to be in this room every day and like do the same exact thing, which was what PT was to me at the time until even that discipline has expanded quite a bit. But I knew that's not where I wanted to go. And so I was kind of working as a personal trainer and I was getting close to graduation. And I was like, I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so it kind of popped up as an opportunity to just continue on and get a master's. And so I was like, perfect. Since I'm indecisive, I'll just keep going to school. And one of my summers in my master's, I got this email from the department about a summer job, a research lab working with rats, and it was an exercise lab. I was like, well, I love exercise. Like research seems very new to me. And the rat thing is like a little weird, but it paid super well. I was like, awesome, I'm going to apply and do it. And so that's kind of what started me on my track to research. And that advisor of that lab, Dr. Karen Esser, is still one of my mentors today. And she's one of the reasons why I got my master's, I got my PhD, and now I'm a postdoc because she really changed the trajectory of my career path and like really set me on the track of research because I was always really inquisitive and curious, but I didn't know that research existed or like things needed to happen to like create new things. It just was super new to me and I thought that was really awesome. And so I worked in her lab. I was like, rats are cool, but I want to work with humans and still kind of be in this exercise space. And so she was like, have you ever thought about getting a PhD? And I was like, I don't know what that is. Like, what does that mean? Oh, more school. Yeah, sure. Sign me up. And so that pushed me to Auburn University, where I was in a molecular and applied physiology lab. And I studied resistance training in women. And so when I started my program, I was like, well, I don't know what I want to research, but I know I want to research women because in terms of like the underrepresentation and all of that, I'm like, I want to research people that look like me or that we have shared characteristics. And so that kind of put me on that path of doing research on the PhD level. As I was getting closer to graduating, I was at that same crossroads of now, what do I do? And for the longest time, I was like, I'm not going into academia. I don't want to work at a university or institution. I want to go into sport or industry and get some high-paying job and just kind of be done with it. And I ended up at another university in a postdoc position. Which is it's still kind of unique because I am a postdoc for the WUSI Human Performance Alliance, and so all of their research is toward human optimization and human performance. So I felt some like real synergies in that program. So that's what pulled me to Stanford, and so now I'm like purely in the human performance space right now, really focusing on female athletes, and that's kind of how Naomi and I overlapped. I'm not exactly sure. I
Yeah.
think our advisor was just like, "Oh, Naomi Morgan, you guys are both doing like women's health. Like, you guys should talk." And
He was like, you guys are the only black girls in the program. You
yeah,
guys should. I was like, thank
yeah. And so like kind of looking at similar stuff, and then that's just kind of how we came together. And so Naomi, and we'll probably talk about one of the studies that she's doing, but it's like specifically in like menstrual cycle research. And so that's something that I also do some educational stuff with and research from a different perspective in different populations. But we kind of came together to not only me like mentoring her and helping her get her PhD project off the ground. But now we probably work together on every single project that we do,
you.
which has been amazing for both of us. And it's like if something pops up, I'm like, oh, Naomi, I have something else for you to do. But yeah, we met. I've been here 3 years, and so we probably met like in soon after I got here, and kind of have been
Yeah.
tied at the hip since then.
I love
Yeah.
it. That's so
Such a
cool.
gift.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say we'll talk about mentorship in one question or 1 second, but I just wanted to ask, and I think maybe Morgan can like just like tell us about the like the structure. We've obviously interviewed Emily Krauss
Mhm.
on the podcast before. Keely and I are both good friends with her. So we know about Faster. We've heard about the Wu Tsai performance idea and the research there. Where do you both fit within the like, I know you're both in the genetics department technically, but how does this all fit at Stanford? It seems like there are a lot of names and like
Mhm.
institutes and projects and just like paint that picture for our audience and then we can talk about some other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely like a masterpiece, if you will. So like Naomi and I are both in the genetics department, which is in the School of Medicine. Um, However, all of my projects have multiple advisors on them. So our advisor, his name's Mike Snyder, and so we kind of there's always some type of genetic component to my projects, but I work with Emily very closely. So the FASTER team, like I've led some of their research and like have helped out with a lot of their educational pieces. So a lot of times it looks like multiple advisors from multiple departments working on one singular project. Um, so that's kind of how it looks like. I always like joke that I don't really have a home. Like I kind of float between multiple labs. And like one of my biggest projects is housed in like the bioengineering neuroscience department, which is not my specialty at all, but the PI is awesome and we wanted to do a project together. So we kind of created this proposal and put something together. So like Naomi and I's physical offices are in the genetics department, but we're kind of all around campus collaborating with different
Mm.
advisors and labs. And like Stanford's a really great place to do that because they do kind of
Yeah.
foster this multidisciplinary approach. So even a lot of the research projects that you propose, they're like, you need to have 3 advisors and they need to be from all different departments. So it really fosters that. So that's kind of what it looks like. Just picture my head floating around different buildings around campus, putting pieces together for projects.
That's so cool. I like that like integrative approach. They don't do as much human research at UCSF, but they have the Quantitative Biosciences Institute or QBI, and they do all these like weird molecular co-projects where they like force collaboration between researchers, which is really great.
Yeah.
Sometimes it has to be forced, but it's really cool. It like turns out like, oh, we can create a COVID vaccine this way, etc.
I love
Yeah, it's so
interdisciplinary
important.
research.
Yeah. My friend is a chemist and he's like, biology is nothing. It's all chemistry, girl. Like, yeah, you're right, kind of. That's true.
Yeah, that's fair. He has a point. I think the real key
Yeah.
is just like there's not one system is not by itself. You can't like do biology research without thinking about chemistry or thinking about something else, which is cool.
Love
Yeah,
it.
I think I was like a really big advocate of interdisciplinary research when I was a scientist at Nike because I felt like I was a jack of all trades, but like not really a perfectionist at anything because I was surrounded by PhDs and I was not one. And so I'd be like, nope, nope, this we need to collaborate. And they'd all be like, no, it's just a biomechanics thing. Or no, it's just a physiology thing. I'm like, no, it needs to be all of us working on this. This is like we need to be collaborative. But I kind of want to take a step back to your guys' journey again. obviously like the field of sports science, to your point, it wasn't even really a thing when I was in college either. I was in school around the same time as you guys were, and I didn't even know you could major in exercise science. And now you're both kind of working in this exercise science, performance, women's health field that has historically been dominated by men, typically white men. And historically, even the participants who are the research participants have also been men. And I know, Naomi, you mentioned how you growing up had this kind of like question for yourself of like, how do I fit in? And so, how do you find that you made it into this space as two women of color? And like, how are you feeling like the space is progressing or maybe not progressing? And like, how does mentorship fit into there? Because I know you two now are really like close, and that's probably really helpful. But I'm sure that it always hasn't been that easy finding like a mentor who's helpful to help you climb through this space. So, Naomi, if you don't mind talking through just kind of your journey in that space, I'd be really
Yeah,
intrigued to hear that.
that is a super excellent question. Um, wow. Yeah, I think that almost in a way, like radical acceptance over like this is an incredibly male dominated space, research as a whole. Like genetics, biology, like it's funny, the majority of the students are female in a lot of these institutions and universities, but the majority of the professors are male statistically in a lot of these. And so it's such an interesting thing to think about. And I've been, of course, thinking about it for a long time. But I think in some ways, acceptance in the sense that the guidance that that I have received by the white men who have mentored me has been really incredible. Um, and I think that I've been really lucky in that I've always had a mentor. All my mentors basically have been white men, except until Morgan. But I've been really lucky in that they've all believed in me. They've all been like, here's the mic, like, you do your thing, like, full, runway, which has been really, really lucky. And I think is a pretty unique experience. And I feel a lot of gratitude for that. So I've received like a lot of support. That said, seeking out Morgan, like one of the reasons I had actually left a lab when I got to Stanford, because I didn't feel great support. And so Mike was like, "Oh, I have this postdoc, she might be able to give you some more aligned guidance." In that we had so many overlapping identities, um, Morgan and I. And so getting this experience with Morgan has shown me that I actually, although have a lot of gratitude for the beautiful mentorship I've had in the past with the white men that I've worked with, having Morgan as a mentor has like really changed my life. It's like, it's unbelievable to be able to work with somebody and like get advice from somebody who like sees you and understands you. And it's been so instrumental in my confidence building. I still am absolutely working on this. Before, I'll say something like, I think blah, 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 when I absolutely am certain. I know for a fact that this is the case. The sentence I'm about to say is true, but I'm like, maybe like I think. And Morgan's like, just say it. Like, you know that it's true, say it. And like, I think that hearing that advice or guidance from somebody who doesn't share the identities that I have and that are such a big part of what is seen, like when I walk into a room, um, it's yeah, I don't know. I'm not doing a great job answering this question, but it's been huge for my confidence, being able to work with Morgan. And I also think being in a space that is so dominated by white men and that is like, I don't know how to word this properly, but is like largely for Black women. Like Black women make up a huge percentage of athletes, yet the people that are doing the work are white men. And it's like there's such a huge disconnect there. And so it's made me feel like entering the space has also made me feel like there is so much need for more Black women in research. And I feel that there's room for me. I feel when I speak to people, like participants, for example, like the enthusiasm is so much more present that they're going to be working with a Black female researcher than a white male researcher. And so there is such a need for more Black women in the space, and there is room, and there is acceptance, and there is like, I feel like I've been given a lot of space to work within this field, and it hasn't been, I've not come up against a lot of resistance to that end, I guess.
It's one of those things where it's like I was listening to colleagues of mine in the sporting space, and they run a great podcast, but I was like, oh, this is two white dudes' perspective on this topic. It's not a full perspective, it's not well rounded. It's like, and they're not wrong, but they just like their default is white male. And it's like
Totally.
it's not made for anyone else. It's not built for anyone else. And so I do think that like having both of you in the space, like the default changes, and that's really special.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel that people have been really open to that default changing, shifting within my own sphere. And so I'm really happy about that and excited about that.
And I guess to follow up on that, so Morgan, like you've also had mentors, but now you're no longer, well, I'm sure you're still a mentee in some regard to some higher power, but you're now the mentor in a lot of ways. And like, what is that, I guess, and maybe the hindsight is 2020 as you like reflect on this relationship with Naomi, or in the like, how special is it to be in a position where you can be ready to fill those kind of mentorship shoes?
Yeah, I think at first, and I don't know if how like the mentee mentor like language came up, but at first it was pretty scary because I felt like I still, like you just said, like I still feel like a mentee. Like I still have mentors that I'm like emailing, calling, and be like, how do I respond to this email? Like there's still things that I feel like growing in. And so having someone kind of look up to me and it's like, oh, hey, what would you do in this situation? I'm like, oh, wait, I've actually experienced that, or I've learned from this, or like I have experiences to share. So like at first it was a little scary, and then it was like the awareness of like everything that I've gone through and been through, and being able to share that with like other students. And so like we'll probably get to this later, but I also coach high school kids, and so like being like in that like mentor space for like teenagers, I was like, oh my God, like I don't feel like a teenager, but I feel like I was just in high school. But they clearly remind me that I'm not, and I'm very old. But like being in that role for the first time was, and then like that finishing with it being like very like empowering, and knowing that like I can encourage people and get people to stay curious and be an actual support is also very validating, just of like your experiences and knowledge base and skill set. But to Naomi's point, I mean, I think there's still a lot of room in the athletic space, the sports science space, to just have more voices. And even Corinne, you're just mentioning for podcasts of, being led by two white males. It's like, it's not that it's wrong. It's just that that's their reality. And their reality is not the same for at least half the population, because half the population are female. And then on top of that, you have all of these like race, socioeconomic status, like all these other things that impact people's perspective of the world. And so I think it's really important to get as many diverse voices in a room, because like even all four of us don't have the same view of the world, and that's a beautiful thing. And so we want to be able to share those things and learn from one another. And then Keely, like you were mentioning, is like, and that's also from the research perspective, that's what makes really good research projects, is because you take into account all of these perspectives from the very beginning. And it's not just like, oh, we did this research project and now we're trying to add on like sprinkle DEI on it. It's like, that's not what needs to happen. It's like, how do we actually make all of these experiences and projects really as inclusive and, I almost want to
Mm,
say, sensitive as possible. Like, what are the things that we need to take into account before we can kind of move forward with this? And it's not just research, it's conversations, it's relationships.
mm,
How can we just be as kind of open-eyed as possible to really push all of our fields forward? And that's, not just for science, it's for business, it's for marketing, it's for all of that. How do we speak to all of the people in the world? Because even if I'm just speaking to people that look like me, I'm missing the majority of the population. So it's still really important. And I'm like really grateful to be in this position and to be like working with Naomi and be in the genetics department. And like we are pioneering the space, if you will, in terms of like gender, sex, and race in this department.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's been really cool to think about our research from to be able to think about our research from our own personal perspectives, and that like I am a Black woman, all my research so far is done in a way that is like, okay, how can we increase equity? Like my goal is long-term equality, but we're so far from equality. We need to focus on like how can I, like I always call it like I'm Robin Hooding Stanford. How can I really utilize my privilege and my resources at Stanford
Mm.
and give back to my community in these different ways? And like research is such an important way to do that because it's the foundation of healthcare. It's the foundation of creating training for sports and athletics. And it's so important.
So I think we've
And
got kind of a quick question before we segue. It's not going to be quick
Into
by
your
any means.
research.
Into
We're so
the
excited
research.
about the research.
But there's one thing that you both have touched on, and I think it's interesting. I think Morgan comes probably from the like marrying science and athletics, and like that is her passion. And Naomi, I get the sense that it's like this kind of like healthcare disparity and science, and like this kind of like how do I like, and that's intersecting now, like females in performance. But I'm
Yeah.
wondering, and I made a joke in my like outline where I was like, in your abundant free time, Morgan's like coaching high school too, which is like a whole thing. But the work that you're doing at Stanford is allowing you to marry a bunch of these things together. And I'm wondering how you each reflect on that. Like Morgan from a athletics and sporting standpoint. And Naomi, if it is a sporting standpoint, I'd love to hear about that. But if it is this like kind of you had a friend who was going through this thing that you were like thrown by that there's no, it's like the black box of research for women. I'd love to hear you both just like reflect on that idea of like you're not just in a lab like punching numbers into a computer. Like you guys are doing real world stuff. You're going out and you're doing talks at Renegade. You're like meeting with your community and it's translating science from this like stale, stagnant, lab-based approach to like in-field application that I think is really, really important. So Morgan, maybe kick it off from your perspective. And then Naomi, I'd love to hear about that from your perspective.
Yeah, I love that question. And I think that is the driver of all of my work. I think that science doesn't matter if it doesn't reach the general population. And there's like
Mhm.
various amount like time frames of like how long it takes research to like get out of a paper into the real world, as little as 7 years, and up to like 20 years of like, okay, it's a study can be done this year and we won't actually apply that knowledge until 2045, because it takes that long for it to be disseminated, understood, implemented. And in like the sporting space, like we are seeing that. Like if you see like, oh, like this little like training paradigm that I've done, it's like I can show you a paper where they did that 10 years ago. But it's stuck in like, it's on paper that no one wants to read, especially if you're not in the science kind of realm, and it's written in a way that like layman's terms, like it's not in layman's terms. It's really hard to understand. And so that's why like I have such a big emphasis on, okay, if I'm designing a study, and like specific in athletes, I'm like, I go up to them before we start. It's like, okay, does this sound interesting to you? Is this helpful? And then how can we implement this? Like, how will this be usable? And then I go to the coaches, to the strength coaches, like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? And they'll say, no, that's not going to work, or oh, we already implement something like this. And they'll give you feedback on how you can design a study that will actually be helpful. Because I think a lot of scientists get stuck is like, there's a bunch of stuff in science that's super cool and that is super pigeonholed, and you can get into the nitty, very gritty of how a cell works and all of this stuff. It definitely depends on what your impact is. Like if your impact is disease or healthcare, it can look a little bit different because you can kind of get more into the mechanism. But for my space, it's more in the applied world. So if I'm looking at how different like proteomic change over time, how am I going to tell that to an athlete and why will they care? And so you have to make sure that you have something that is tangible and digestible for people. And so for my research, like I always ensure now that there's an output of the project that can be taken up and given to the athletes right away. It's like, okay, this is like we do lactate, for example. This is why your lactate goes up. These are what your ranges are. Now, how can you use this for your training? And then I think that also, and Naomi probably shares this too, of like pairing it with education. And so, we have other research projects where you have one on pelvic floor. And so we actually hosted a panel of pelvic floor physical therapists with women and like with mothers. They're like, ask all the questions you want. We have a research study that's like a survey that you can fill out after, but like this is what people care about. They want to know how they can actually get to these resources. What is the research saying now that they can actually implement in their life? And so for me, it's really being able to pair that education piece and then adding on top of that, like the coaching aspect, especially in this movement science space, there's so much research on different training paradigms and like fueling and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really hard with training because it's so sensitive and based on like how much you sleep, how old you are, what's your training age, like all of those things. And so when I'm working with high school athletes, like I'm trying things that I've either seen in the lab or like I read a paper and I'm like, let's try this 4-week block and see how we respond and like our speed training and that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And especially with high school athletes, it's telling them why you're doing something. Like for any coach, it's like you don't just give a kid a workout and don't tell them anything about like, why are we doing 8 200s? I'll tell you exactly why and like how we're trying to get a response out of your system. And so I think it's that education piece with like the action or like with the programming that I'm implementing so they can start to learn, okay, how is this impacting my body? Where is this coming from? Because they'll ask you like, okay, we're doing this, but like, how do you know this works? And I'm like, I'm not going to give you this paper to read, but I'm going to tell you exactly why. Or if it doesn't work, you also then need to be able to explain why did this not work for me? And so I think it's having like that well-rounded view of how you're implementing things or and especially where things are coming from. And like sometimes like I have like a training paradigm and I'm like, why am I doing this? And I have to kind of go back and figure out why. But that education piece is so important because yes, you can write the paper and that's really important for scientists and getting an academic job and all of that. And Stanford's pretty notorious for like, the PhD students have to have a certain number of first author manuscripts and like things like that. So it kind of shows you where that priority is. But when you get out working with people and like actually having to implement, they don't care how many papers you have. They want to know what's your background, do you know what you're talking about, and can you actually translate it to me? That's the biggest part.
I love it.
Yeah, and I really like using like the clinical significance as like the first parameter for figuring out if the study is going to be helpful instead of looking at it after the fact, right? It's like, cool, the p-value shows that there's a
Right.
relationship, but that might not be clinically relevant to this population at all. So therefore that study is not applicable, right? Like you're not going to apply that to research athletes. So I really love that kind of flipped narrative where you're like thinking of that first instead of secondary.
Yeah, co-learning is really important. There's actually an incredible paper on co-learning, and I was telling this to one of my participants, and they were like, "No shit." I was like, "Yeah, well, for scientists, this is really new of an idea of like you go into a community, you think about their goals, their desires, their boundaries, like what they absolutely don't want studied, and then you kind of shape the questions from there and like the concept that your participants have just as much knowledge to give you as you have to give to the scientific community, this like idea that like we are all equal stakeholders. Yeah, it's like really not utilized in science. And I really like to think of myself as a public servant, as a PhD candidate, my salary is paid for by taxpayers. So if like I am not doing work that then benefits taxpayers, what's what's the point? And I think that just like blind curiosity is also really important. It really is like pasteurization only exists because of like somebody was trying to figure out a totally different goal and accidents happen and it was really cool. But doing translational work that is like directly applicable to benefit society and like to it's also such a beautiful privilege to be able to have a say in the shaping of society. Like being a researcher gives you so much power because we live in a society where data is knowledge and knowledge is power. And currently in America, in Europe, and most places, knowledge is really gatekept behind paywalls. Like, even if you could read a lot of these papers, which, like Morgan said, the jargon is so intense that it's really hard to read, but they're behind paywalls that you can only access if you're at a different institution. So it's just like all the knowledge kind of stays within this really intense hierarchical structure that it was designed completely intentionally, of course. Um, and so it takes so long for the general population to get their hands on this piece of information. And then, and as an adult, it's like, where's the built-in time to learn? Because you're not in school anymore. You might have such a huge like load on your plate. You have kids, you have a job. Like the last thing you want to do when you get home and like feed your kids and put them to bed is like read a comic paper, right? And so like, how can we as scientists make this as like enjoyable and easy and fun? Because the desire to learn is there, but the time from and like the way that society is set up, it's just really hard. But something that I've seen by going out into the community and having these like, you know, talks, they're not even really talks, they're like educational events. It's like the turnout's really good. People are really curious. It's just that it's hard and inaccessible to learn as an adult, which is such a tragic thing, you know?
It's super tragic. And I think it was really interesting when I sent, or like when I told Keely the paper I wanted to look at for this, you like even the title, like I read the paper, it's great, no jargon. Like it's very
Thank you.
understandable. It's great in that sense because you're right. So much science is like gate kept just in like terminology and like even
Mm.
the title of this like narrative review, and I love narrative reviews, they're like my favorite type of literature review, is called How the Menstrual Cycle Can Be Utilized During Sports Training, Performance, and Recovery Through Wearable Technology, a narrative review for researchers, physicians, coaches, and athletes. And
It's long.
it reads as such. It's a long title, but it reads as such. Like it is, I was like, this is a paper that I could hand off to a high school coach and it would be valuable to them. It's a paper that I could hand off to a parent and it would be valuable to them. I could hand this off to any one of my adult athletes that I coach and they would find value in it. And that's so cool. And that is, I think, very rare. And my first question for this was literally just like, so why? Like, why this like area? Because I'm assuming this is kind of building into what you're studying, Naomi, for kind of like your PhD candidacy, or at least it interacts with it. Like,
Yeah,
why this
absolutely.
area? Why this thing?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Just like I cannot tell you, as a scientist, that's the biggest compliment you can receive. Even the least social science, like the scientist who's like, I hate giving talks, I don't want to talk. Still, the nicest thing you could tell any scientist is that they're good at communicating their work.
Truly.
So that is like the most flattering. I thank you, Morgan co-wrote that with me. And so yeah, that means the world. Um, but funny enough, so. I love working in the space. The realm of athletes are like the most incredible people to be around. Like the inspiration and like the power, like being around athletes is just so special. There's such a unique group of like motivated people, and I am not a highly motivated individual. I'm just not. I'm not a hard worker. I'm like, this is not something that I value myself, and that's okay. But I feel like being around athletes is like just so inspiring. And so it is like a space that every day I'm trying to edge closer and closer towards. But we actually wrote this because it was requested. So we had a mutual mutual research. We had been working with somebody at Harvard um, kind of distantly who's working in a similar space, and i.e., like women's health. And so she was up for a guest review for a magazine, and it was seminars in reproductive medicine. And Morgan and I had met with her once long, long ago. And as she became this guest editor for this seminar series, she thought of us and was like, reached out and was just like, hey, I want you to write a review paper about athletes and menstruation, specifically in regards to how wearable tech can be utilized. And so that was like, you know, we were put within these kind of boundaries to write this paper. She gave us a lot of freedom within that, though, was like, okay, like level of athlete that you want to focus on, and like the overall narrative, because there is so little research done specifically on athletes utilizing wearable tech to consider the menstrual cycle. Like that is just like those three things in a research paper, you will be digging and scouring the internet for ever, and you're going to come up with, maybe 15 papers, and a lot of narrative reviews are citing hundreds of papers. And so, and you think about a lot of these other spaces, and yeah, there are thousands, tens of thousands of research studies on them. In this space, it's like you're hard pressed to find a couple dozen. So it was definitely a challenge, but it was so much fun. And it is so within the realm of organized interests that it really was easy to write in that way. But yeah, that's kind of what prompted that.
Yeah, I mean, we really love reading it as well. This is like something that I'm super passionate about too. So I'm like, you guys are doing the studies that I really wanted to do when I was at Nike. So I'm so proud of you guys.
Come
It's
join our
so
research
cool.
team. We
Yeah,
always
be
Yeah, I was
the
need
gonna say,
researchers.
collaborator. I'm stoked to collaborate. I can collaborate from OHSU. Anyways, so obviously, like one of our favorite things to call out on this podcast specifically, and it's like kind of a running joke at this point between Corinne and I, because I feel like there's always like a new paper that comes out that's like studying the menstrual cycle versus this performance metric. And it's always like we don't
Mm,
really find a change. But then you look at the individual like metrics and you look at the graph and you see that the average is right in the middle, but that there's some women who are very drastic responders and some that are not, right? And so that's kind of one of our favorite things to call out is that, like, yeah, a lot of these studies show that there's no variability across the menstrual cycle, but I think we can all kind of agree that it's highly individualized. However, I think
yeah,
that all of these studies have kind of left the public like really confused as to what to do with their
super
menstrual
confused.
cycle. And so, do you guys want to talk about like what your paper kind of aims to propose as a way to start studying this and start like almost like creating a gold standard for studying this for giving women direction as to how to understand their cycles? And yeah, kind of talk through that. Morgan, if you want to start, just so we can
Yeah.
give you, yeah.
Yeah, and I can kind of talk about it from the performance perspective, and then I'll kick it to Naomi for more like the individualized approach. We just talked about this like last week, so like we're primed and ready. But yeah, I think that that call out is huge, and I studied responders and non-responders in my PhD, and that was kind of the narrative is like, okay, if you read a paper, it's like, okay, this was like the mean, and then you have people that like did respond or people that didn't respond, and so I think when it comes to performance and with menstrual cycle now, it's so important to really start to understand how you physically respond or physically, emotionally, all of that to your menstrual cycle and to your training. Because yes, all of the papers are kind of telling us like the effects are zero, like wherever you are in your cycle. And I think it can be the narrative around talking about menstrual cycle and training is super important. And what I tell athletes all the time is no matter where you are in your cycle, you are able to perform at your very best. Especially for athletes that like your race is going to happen on this day, no matter what. It doesn't matter where you are in your cycle. Your like NCAAs are going to happen at these days, no matter what. And so I think how we're actually talking about the menstrual cycle and training is super important, for athletes because their competitions don't move. And so I think having that understanding and that confidence of like, okay, no matter where I am, I can perform my very best. And how can I, better utilize recovery strategies? How can I like change my taper a little bit? I feel a little bit better going into my competition. And so that can be menstrual cycle related, or something else I like to point out and call out for athletes is like before, like we just point menstrual cycle as the bad guy or bad girl. Think about, are you sleeping? Like, let's also consider that. Are you eating enough? When's the last time you drink water? Like, do you go outside and get your face? Like, I think I I like to group menstrual cycle as like just another factor that
Yep.
you consider when you're considering your training. And so it's not just like I'm in this part of my cycle. I just need to change preemptively how I'm training. And there's some like studies that are kind of getting there is like you can do that. And I would also say try it and see if you like it, see if you respond well to training. Because a big part of this, and probably what Naomi's going to get into, is trial and error to figure out like how do you actually respond to different training paradigms, and especially like where you are in your cycle. I think that there's no harm in trying something new. I would also say to just try it for a long time. I think some people are like, oh, I tried it for 1 week and it didn't really work for me. Or, especially for your menstrual cycle, at least 3 cycles, like at least 3 cycles of doing something to see what kind of effect it's having on you, especially when it's in relation to training. And so I'll probably kick it to Naomi to get more into like that individualized approach, but know that, how everyone responds to their menstrual cycle and training is going to be
Mm.
totally different. Especially if you're on a team. I think that's another big thing that we see is like, oh, well, like my teammate is like, we're kind of in the same part of our cycle. She's killing her workout and I'm dying. It's like now like there's something wrong with me. And it's like, oh, let's pause. That's not where we want this narrative to go. And I think it's, the devil in the details of like figuring out what are your best recovery strategies. Because when we're talking about training, sometimes like your training is set, especially for some like competitions or depending on your sport, it's like, okay, this day I have a long run. This day I have a heavy lift. And sometimes you can change it day to day, but other times you can't. And so I think sometimes it can kind of put us in a box of like, okay, well, now what? And it's like, it's that recovery and it's that preparation for the training session that can really elevate you and make you feel as good as possible.
Yeah. So I mean, the menstrual cycle is, like Morgan said, it's so individual. There's so many factors that influence your menstrual cycle, so many factors that influence your menstrual cycle experience. So whether that's like something as seemingly distant as your serotonin receptor function and your brain's ability to kind of receive an increase in hormone supply and then like handle it well, quote unquote, and um or your response to your environment. Like there are just so many components essentially to what's going to impact your menstrual cycle. And so I think that what can be really challenging is like, okay, everybody says I should do this type of training on my during my luteal phase versus this type of training during my follicular phase. And to be honest, that person doesn't even know when their follicular and luteal phase is because those are different between all different people. So my follicular phase might start, and end after day 16, and somebody else's might end day 12. And so it's like there are just so many components to this conversation. And I think that that is also kind of what makes the conversation challenging from a research perspective. So, like, to kind of also give some clarity to why society is so confused by research outcomes, and it's really because of the lack of like congruence between these studies. They are all incredibly variable. You can't do it two, three, four studies and have different phases and have different metrics for what strength is and have different time points because your hormones can change 110% in any given cell in a 24-hour period. Like, so the time of day that you're taking these like hormone measurements matters. Like, you have to be so granular with these research studies, and currently they're just not. And so it's like, yeah, we have these 5, 10, 15 studies, and we're trying to compare them to have this, to be able to say something about the biology. But honestly, you really can't compare these apples and oranges studies because they're looking at the same thing under like completely different lenses and considering like different time points to be different phases. And it's just like, yeah, there's a lack of consistency amongst these like research definitions. And I think that that's a huge problem when trying to consider, okay, we want to be able to say something at large from these results and from the results of other people's papers. And it's like they're all so there's so much variability. They're not reproducible. They're not rigorous in that way. And so we kind of have to back up and say, okay, like let's all get on the same page from a research perspective. And then we can kind of try to ask these questions with a higher level of granularity.
Yeah, that seemed to be kind of like the like one of the big takeaways that I think you guys spoke to really well in the paper was that like the research that is out there that exists is limited. And then in that research, it's also like we haven't established a gold standard in which we know for certain that they're actually even addressing appropriate phasing, et cetera. And so as someone who's wearable curious, we were like early adopters with Aura Ring, for
Yes.
example. As a wearable curious person, like the million
Yeah.
dollar question is, are you currently working on a project that involves wearable technology now so that we
Yeah.
can in theory, address this.
Yeah, so I love wearable tech. I'm also a huge, I'm like my dream job is one day to like go and work at Aura or Whoop or one of these company women's health team and be, a scientist there, start my own. I love wearable tech because personalized medicine is our future. If we do it in an equitable way with justice like at the forefront, then I think that wearable tech has so much power to influence society, like from a general health standpoint, but also from like optimizing athletic performance. Because as I said earlier, like data really is power. If you have information about yourself, if you know yourself, if you know, like based on some of your readouts, okay, I actually know that my luteal phase ends here on this day. And so this gives me a lot more insight into you know, where my hormone levels are during this phase of my workout, whatnot. It's just really empowering from a personalized perspective. And it's also really great at showing like deltas. So, like, kind of getting away from relying on averages and thinking about your own personal baseline, because that is what's going to really matter. Not like your deviation from a baseline or from an average that was set by, a group of 25 European men, or something like that. So, yeah, I'm really excited about wearable tech. And we're working on a project right now where it's focusing on how can we utilize wearable tech, which parts of wearable tech, which biometrics are the most reliable, are the most consistently having really high significant deltas, whether that's HRV, whether that's temperature, whether that's heart rate, and to be able to then predict where you're at in your cycle or how long your cycle actually is from a hormonal standpoint, right? Rather than just counting and relying on the days from day zero of your first period to day zero of your first period, especially like if you're on birth control, um, which a really big percentage of female athletes are on birth control. And so you're having a withdrawal bleed. You don't have a quote unquote natural period. And so those days are informative, of course, but kind of not. And so relying on the data that you're getting from your wearable readouts can be really, really useful there. Of course, all within the disclaimer that there is, I believe, such a thing as too much data. Like, and some people, honestly, it's not helpful at all. It just stresses you out. And I think one of my biggest surprising, like what was shocking to me as I was doing this literature review to write our paper was how important perception is. And like, I know that placebo is real. I know that the brain is at the end of the day, like number one, like that's where the power's at, right? Is in your perception. But I had not realized it would be so quantifiable that like your perception of sleep is poor, but your sleep is not actually poor when you're on your period. A study found that. Or, your perception of your performance is that is that you perform at a lower quality when the statistics and the tests that you're taking are showing that you're actually performing at the same level, regardless of where you're at. And so, what really matters is the perception. And if you're somebody who the data is going to empower you, then that's really cool. But within the context of individuality of health is also the importance of in the some people do not. Some people, the data I think does more harm than good. So that's always like a little disclaimer that I find important. Or doing a data detox. And like right now, I'm not wearing my Oura ring. I'm going to give it 2 weeks. No Oura ring. No, I'm not checking in. I don't care how I slept. Like I just want to like live off the land. No, I'm kidding. But just like do my little like, all right, I'm taking a break. I'm not thinking about it. I'm just going to do what feels good. And I'm going to do it kind of blind. And then I'll put my ring back on and be like, okay. Yeah, that's so winded. All my answers are so winded.
I dig it.
Don't apologize. Yeah, I'm with you though. I think whenever I have a big race or a big exam, I can't look at my Aura ring score in the morning because it doesn't matter. Nothing's going to change if it's bad or
It
good,
doesn't matter. Yeah. You slept how you
You're like,
slept. The
we're
night's
still
done,
going
baby.
today, so we gotta awesome.
Yeah,
Okay, we have a couple more questions. They probably will take about 5 minutes. So I just wanted to do a quick time check to make
that's
sure you
fine.
guys are okay to go like 5 minutes over. Okay, cool. So then yeah, a couple more questions and we'll sign off and let you guys go. So I'll turn it back over to Corinne.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing is I just wanted to like peek behind the curtain a little bit. Like I know that you guys have been in the field doing some data collection. And I'm curious, Morgan, again, I'm like our sport enthusiast in field data collection. Can you give us a little insight into kind of what studies being set up and what you are hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, we are one of my big projects is doing like in-field data collection with teams. And so one team we have is a rowing team and one team we have is a soccer team. And so like for our rowing team, we set up our data collection literally outside the erg room, which is like in this basement building on Stanford campus. And so like we are doing things like lactate and creatine kinase, essentially a bunch of inflammatory markers from saliva and some finger pricks and arm pricks before and after exercise. And we're looking at that, how that changes from preseason through close to the postseason. So
Mhm.
kind of right before we send people off, or not we, right before they go off to compete in like the national championships. And so it's really fun. I also project that I've dragged Naomi onto so willingly because we need to be able to do in-person data collection. We need, we might have 40 athletes. And so if there's only three of us, we are in trouble. So it's been really fun to do that. It's been like, it's something I've always wanted to do is to do data collection in the field because so many things that we do are like in the lab or in the hospital or it's like very standardized or like everyone's fasted and like I'm like if you take an athlete it's like hey can you fast 12 hours before the biggest game of your life they'll be like no chance. So how do we kind of replicate that in like the science perspective and like the big or research perspective and like the big balance is like how can we get it to be as rigorous as possible while also being realistic? And so some of those conversations we've had with the coaching staff, it's like, okay, this is what we're thinking to do collection. And they're like, yeah, there's no way that's going to be possible. Like, we need to change the day. Here's what our workout is. And so how can they kind of give us the barriers that we need to overcome. And then as you like work with teams, it's more of like a relationship of like, okay, well, can we split the group in half? And can you stagger them by like 4 minutes? And they're like, okay, yes, we can do that. So it's been a lot of fun and it's definitely something that like I'm being like mentored and learning because it's like, okay, how can we make sure we have as like great of samples as possible. So yeah, that's what we're doing. And then for the soccer team, we were out on the soccer field. They ran a 1500. And so like as they're crossing the line and like, passing out like full exertion, we're like, hey, in like 2 minutes, can you come sit in this chair so we can like prick your finger and do all this stuff? But I mean, it's also the balance of trying to do things that's the least amount of burden as possible. So like if you want to
Mm.
collect any type of blood, you're not doing a venous blood draw, you're pricking their finger or you're pricking their arm. And it's like how can we and like technologies are actually really advancing for us to be able to do that and get some really, really good quality data.
Yeah.
So it's just something to keep in mind when you're working with athletes. I mean, even for both of you, it's like if you just finished a race or something, it's like, okay, now can we take 10 vials of blood and
Yeah.
can we then do like a dietary nutrition intake right now? And then like, and you do a VO2 max test, like, but like when you catch your breath, like obviously you want
It's
to do
so
that.
hard. Yeah,
Um,
it really is so hard. I feel like I should give researchers more credit. My favorite thing in the world is being hard on researchers, but it is really hard, especially coming from studying spiders, where it's like you do have so much control over the environment. You have no control over a human. Their environment is so influential into your results. And so it's like I'm working on this other study right now where we're looking at ferritin, this, like the iron store,
Oh, we're
and
so into
somebody
ferritin.
which is amazing. But like, so you only have 60 participants, and one participant just got like an iron transfusion or something like that.
Yep.
They have a ferritin level of 1,000. So now I got to take them out from
I got
from
kicked
a
out of a
stat.
study for the same reason.
It's brutal from a stats perspective as a researcher and not an athlete. I'm like, y'all are impossible.
Yeah. And I mean, the range of ferritin that's considered okay for females is already like 200 milligrams per deciliter ranged, right? Like, it's insane.
Yeah, I got kicked out of a Western state study. You can ask Emily Krause about it because I had a iron infusion like 4 weeks before the event because I was super anemic. And yeah, I got kicked out of that study pretty quickly. And that was like, I think they probably had like 20 participants. So I'm sure I like screwed their
Yes,
stats in a big
it's
way,
really hard to study athletes. Y'all are the most incredible population of humans. I mean it,
but
but
also annoying.
also, damn.
Yeah. Yeah. You add women to that mix and it's like, oh, we've got to like really dial this stuff in. I'm sure Keely's like, okay, I've got an idea for a study. Wearables, we got this.
Always.
She'll slide into your DMs later.
I would love
But
that. Please.
to wrap things up before we let you go, because we're over time here, we
Okay.
always ask people about advice they'd like to give their younger self. And in this case, we'd love to ask advice you'd give to, because we actually have a lot of like young scientists, like people that are in undergrad that are trying to
Mhm.
figure out next steps right now. And they're looking at that always going to school for forever trajectory potentially. So, wondering if you had any final advice or a piece of advice you'd give to young athletes or to young scientists out there. Morgan, why don't you take that one first?
Oh, I was hoping you'd say Naomi first. I
Just think about what
oh
you say to me every day.
yeah, and there's quite a few things I would say. I'll keep it short. I think the first is I always tell people to be kind to yourself, no matter like what you're doing or what you're navigating. Always show yourself grace because it's probably your first time doing it, and it's okay if you don't know what you're doing.
Mm.
The second thing I would say is say yes to as many opportunities as possible, to showing up to certain things, especially for like a young grad student or someone that's trying to get an internship or a job. Say yes to like go to the happy hour, go to like the park event, go to as many things as you can within reason, or like within your means, because you never know who you'll meet um, and like who will be able to like put you into a room. And then my third thing will be is find and have a sponsor. And so a sponsor is a little bit different from a mentor. It's someone that is in your corner that will say your name in a room when you're not there.
Mm.
So that's super important to have of not just because there's always so many people now. It's like, oh, if you ever need anything, email me. Or like, oh, if you need something. And so while that is great, a lot of people don't actually have the power, the status, whatever, to actually make things happen. And that's okay. You also need to find those people that can actually get you into the room, that can vouch for you and say, hey, you should apply for this and like really kind of push for you. So those would be my three quick points.
Yeah,
Perfect.
that is such good. That was really good. I think what I'd say to myself is just give myself a little more space to be learning. Like I really don't like the fake it till you make it because I'm not faking anything. There's no faking. You're learning and now you're pretty good at it. And then you're gonna keep learning and you're gonna get better at it. And there is no like there's this period of like faking it. I've always been like, that's annoying. But yeah, just giving myself more space to be learning and acknowledging that like learning is hard and there's so much that I don't know. And that's totally okay. I don't need to know every single thing in order to be able to speak to something, an aspect of whatever it is that I'm working on, right? And so, yeah, just giving myself a little more grace to learn and I don't know. I feel like I would not say this to myself because I was actually pretty good at this. But one thing that I would say to what I see like the younger generation thinking a lot about is like, just take more breaks, take more breaks. You do not have to do anything right this second. Like nothing is so important that it's worth stressing over or worth losing sleep over. Oh my gosh. Like if you're not sleeping 8 hours, the like getting an A matters way less than getting really good sleep. And we live in a society that says the opposite. We
Yeah.
say the A's matter more than your sleep. Getting a good score on a project matters more than making sure you have time to eat dinner. And I just like want to say that that is absolute bull. That is like capitalist propaganda. It's not true. Like sleep and eat, and then you will be a really lovely, more energized, person. And so when you get the B instead of an A, your professor is going to be like, yeah, but you worked your tail off. You were really dope to have around. And so for those reasons, I'm going to give you a better letter of recommendation or opportunity to come work in my lab just because I thought you were awesome rather than the kid who got the A, but it's like a shell of a human being, like that person is not as successful in my book of what success is. Um, and yeah, take care of yourself first, and all of the quote unquote status success will just like fall into place. If you're like taking care of yourself.
Hmm.
That's so
Very, very well
perfect.
said. Yeah, it's a very big shock when you're in the real world and you're like, you don't want to know my GPA? Oh, dang it. Why
Literally,
did I care so much
keys,
about that?
keys get degrees. I remember I'm very much a straight C student. Like I would get the occasional B and be like, yes. And here I am at Stanford with all the kids who like did not go to a single party and and it's really, I feel, because just like taking care of yourself and being happy will go a long way in like the interview, for example. And yeah, I remember one of my professors was like, maybe you should apply to one more grad school because three is just like not a lot. And I was like, I know my grades, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
I love it. We'll keep taking chances, I guess. And the next time when you guys publish that next piece of data and you want it translated, you're going to do the translating. But
Mm,
when you want it out in the world, we'll have you
soon,
back on to
very
talk some more about
soon.
it.
Yeah, we have a lot of papers that we should be publishing in the next year, next
Nice.
Sick.
365. So
Perfect.
We'll do a round two. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming on today. This was so sick.
thank you. This was so
Yeah.
fun.
So I don't know about you guys, but while I am a happily retired grad student, talking with Morgan and Naomi made me desperately miss research because what they're doing is so cool and so important and so fun. And you can tell that they just really enjoy what they're doing and getting to work in the community in the way they do, getting to work with the teams at Stanford in the way they do. I loved everything about it and it made me hungry for
Mhm.
more.
Yeah, I love that they're tackling like the big questions, the big scary questions that a lot of scientists would shy away from. They're like, no, let's figure that out. Can we use wearables to like look better, look into the menstrual cycle? Can we use wearables to track training? Can we do all these really cool things on a big scale? And I love that.
Yeah. I love that Naomi was also like a wearables realist where she's like, I'm taking a 2 week break from her ring and I'm just listening to my body and then I'll like put it back on and I'll like go about my business. And I love that too. I love that like very honest reflection of, where technology could be really helpful for us as coaches, as future healthcare providers, as athletes. It's super interesting. And I can't wait for them. I know that they are like in the throes of it. Naomi's working on her PhD. Morgan's got a bunch of cool team research going on. And I can't wait to have them back on to discuss kind of future papers and what they're physically working on right now because they're doing data collection and all kinds of fun stuff. So keep your eyes out. I think we will likely have Morgan and Naomi back on down the road. Yeah. That's my only reflection. I guess before we dive into Society Slam, which we have a bunch of fun ones, Hillary dug through the DMs and it seems like they are popping off right now. We just want to give another big shout out to Rabbit, our partner for this year. And again, it's an important reminder that you can go over to Rabbit's website. You can look at all their new, really sweet trail running spring merch that launched, and you can get 10% off with the code Trail March. All one word. Doesn't matter if it's capitalized or lowercase. Trail March at checkout for 10% off. Who wants to slam first?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just wanted to take a moment to reach out and say how much I love your podcast and I appreciated episode 93. That was the one we did about iron, right? It would be incredible if you were able to create an episode as a deep dive into female the gyno issues with an OBGYN. As a 31-year-old endurance athlete and female with endometriosis, it's extremely difficult to find relative information on this topic, specifically relating to management of this disease for runners. I recently had a total hysterectomy for very severe endo, so I'm now in the camp of going through surgical menopause, and it is very hard to find information for getting back into sport and specifically running after going through something like this. Also, it's very validating to hear that birth control can be helpful for this. Personally, because this is so beneficial for management of my symptoms prior to the surgery. Thank you guys again for being so awesome.
Oh, I'd like totally feel for this individual. I feel very fortunate that I do not have endometriosis or PCOS or any kind of big gynecological condition, but I have several friends who have endometriosis and it's a bummer. Like it is painful, it is life altering. It is oftentimes missed until it's super, super bad. Like this individual, like they're like frogs in water slowly being boiled and they like don't realize how bad it is. And because women's issues are like this black box. It's like not well understood. And they end up, yeah, you end up in a position where it's like, yeah, you're having a hysterectomy to deal with the pain, the tissue growth, and they will likely have to have another surgery down the road. And it is wild. And then like the health implications, right? Like they're being put into surgical menopause. Like how does that impact their bone health? One of the best medications for endometriosis, you can only be on it for 2 years per the FDA because of the risk of bone density loss is like so high. So it's just like, yes, we will find the right gyno for this or a couple of gynos even to
Mhm.
have on together. Um, I met one that was at Teraware from the US. I told her we should have her on. She's very shy. She's probably listening to this. Her husband is listening to this too, so we can like work on this together. But yeah, we will find someone because there are a number of gynecological issues with some specific runner influenced like needs too, as far as like management and birth control and all this kind of stuff. So let us find the right people. And if you are the right person, if you are gregarious and personable and an OBGYN who has experience in treating gynecological issues in runners and have some very important medical takes, slide into our DMs. That'd be really awesome. That's my rant on endometriosis.
Yeah, and but just because of the health system and the past like medical care of women, a lot of women don't seek help for a while either because they're afraid of being told that it's not an issue, even though it might be, you know?
Yeah.
Just
It's
so
Yeah.
like
sad.
vague abdominal pain. You're like, this
Ugh.
isn't very vague anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. My sister has it, and it was a big saga from when she started, I mean, like from when she started her cycle, and anywhere from people diagnosing her with cancer to like
Yeah.
they didn't know what it was. It was
Hmm.
incredibly not, I mean, I think there's a huge psychological thing that we can even talk about with this too, because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
witnessed that like firsthand with my
Like they're
sister.
like gaslit the entire time too. Or yeah, you're
Yeah.
like, we have no idea
Mm.
what's wrong with you.
Yeah. So it's really scary. It definitely is an issue, and it's a lot more common than we think. So
Yeah. We feel for you. We're so sorry. Okay. So I'm gonna take this one. Hi there. I absolutely love your podcast and so look forward to the episodes. Your last episode about iron was super informative, and I just wanted to share an anecdote. I'm really happy that I said anecdote right because that word freaks me out and I sometimes really mess it up. They ran their first 50K this past fall, the Tussey Mountain 50K, and during their training block, they found that their fingers and toes would sometimes feel tingly. They had recently cut red meat from their diet and figured they could use the extra iron, but didn't have a PCP at the moment to get blood work to confirm it. So their fast and dirty solution was to get a box of multigrain Cheerios and eat a few handfuls at a time when they felt tingly. To this day, I keep a box in my car, my Carios, as my partner lovingly refers to them. Not science backed, and I should have probably gotten blood work, but heck, it seemed to work. Keep doing what you're doing. Y'all are awesome. That's really funny. And also, like, a placebo is like placebos work, baby. So I don't know why you were tingly. At some point on the road, I would still maybe get blood work done.
Hmm.
But you're right. Cheerios are actually like a pretty okay source of iron. So like more power to you. But you can also like I've been given out recommendations for iron recently, and I will say that I really like the Thorn iron. It's pretty affordable. They've got two kinds, one that has some added stuff in it to make it more like easily absorbable, I will say. And Thorn's a pretty reputable company when it comes to like NSF kind of safe for sports certified products. And so you can find it most places. You can order it online, and it seems to be like a pretty good option for many runners. So Carios or Thorn Iron, which we're not sponsored by, but I just happen to like the product. Either way, whatever makes you happy.
I just have a quick little thing from my college chemistry lab. So I went to school at a small liberal arts college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and there was a big General Mills factory there, and they would always make, it was the joke when we'd have sweet cereal days, like making Captain Crunch. It would smell like berries in the city versus like some other days it'd smell not so good. And there's in particular on the days where they're fortifying the cereal with iron. And I only know this is because, I mean, I think just because there's a lot of decrease in the nutritional value of our foods, and a lot of people are eating like sugary cereals, so they fortify it with a lot of things. We actually extracted iron from General Mills Cheerios, and it's quite a smelly process, but it is definitely there. It's pretty cool to like get some little solid iron, no, like no joke, like deposition, like depositing onto our little like glass beakers from this Cheerios. You're like, what? It was such a cool science experiment. Anyways,
That's so sick. Okay, so it's
That's
really there.
awesome.
Your
it
Carios
is
might be
really
a real
there.
thing.
That's
Okay.
hilarious. All right, final society slam. Hey mates, hope you're all keeping well. Big fan of the pod over here. The info, interviews, and advice you give are so helpful to a newbie runner like me. I listened to y'all on my long runs. Most recently, your episode with Callie Vincent got me through my longest and somehow most enjoyable run yet, 16 kilometers. Wow, nice job. That's freaking amazing. I have a question if y'all are doing an AMA anytime soon or Society Slam. As someone who is fairly new to running, but who wants to toe the line of a 50K trail ultra in the next 12 to 15 months, how do I get there? I'm not aiming to be super fast. All I want to do is make the distance before cutoff. I have a 17K trail race in 6 weeks, which should be chill as I've already run a similar distance. Do you think I should do some shorter events like 25 to 35K before the end of the year and then start ramping it up to the 50K mark, or just start going straight for that 50K? Anywho, thanks for making such a great show and all you do for trail running.
I love that. And
Yeah.
I've got like one thought that I've had, and like the distance is intimidating, right? Distance is scary. I would also say one way to look at this too is like incremental races that will take longer time, because not every 17K is created equally, right? Some have more vert, some are flatter, so some will just take longer than others too. So looking for races that kind of incrementally take you longer, even if the distance doesn't feel like a big jump, right? Like that 20K or 25K or 30K. Obviously that's like we're going towards doubling what you're currently doing right now. Like a flat one might not take as long as a really hilly 30K, let's say, like a really mountainous 30K, a very hilly 30K might take you as long as like a flat 50K sometimes. So I'm just saying, like, think about both the distance, but also think about the time. And I think that you're building yourself a super nice long runway right now. Like a 50K a year from now, like you've got that. You are well on your way, I think.
Yeah, I think just reminding yourself that consistency is going to be the best way to get there. And so not doing anything that feels like too big of a stretch right away, because you have so much time, you can take your time to kind of just build a base of running miles and then slowly try these other races. And yeah, to Corinne's point, I think like doing a race before the 50K would be a really great idea, like to iron out fueling, to iron out what you want to wear, all of those things that you can get done in a shorter race, to just see like how it feels to be in a race environment and going out there longer than you have in the past.
Yeah.
What do you think, Coach Hill?
I mean, I'm always a big fan of like long buildups. I mean, it took me a while to like to up distance, you know. I think a more conservative approach is always better.
Yeah.
So like I would second what Corinne says. I love like the long runway analogy. Like that
I
always
wouldn't you guys love it if someone came to you and asked you to coach them for a 50K a year from now?
Yeah.
It would be so amazing.
Yeah. I've got people that are like, I'm doing this in 12 weeks. And you're like, okay,
Or
let's
like my first
go.
I'm new to ultra running and I want to run 100 milers in like 10 weeks. I'm like, oh boy.
You're like, okay, well, I've heard crazier things. So
Yeah.
no, and
But
that's,
it's
yeah.
I just think it just sets you up for success, right? You're able to like that's how I was lucky enough to have a coach that like encouraged me to do that and just to have a long, slow approach and just to build strength, like get miles like underneath my belt and just build up my endurance. And it has really, I think it helped me for longevity in sport. And just also in your mind, you know, like endurance sports, it's not only taxing on your body, but it's taxing on your mind. So yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna do it. I've got a lot of confidence in this individual who I've
Mhm.
not yet met. I'm excited for you. You've got it. You're
Keep
doing
us
it.
posted on your journey.
Yeah, keep us posted. Excited to see what 50K you decide to take on. That's super exciting. Okay, we're gonna leave it there. If you've gotten this far, you should probably leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you're listening to us, and share it with a friend, because that is how more people find us and listen to us. And if you're on a run right now, you should eat a snack. And until next time, we'll see you out on the trails.